There are two bills proposed for consent. They are item number 8, AB 502, and item number 15, AB 1533. Since we don't and have not established a quorum yet, we will begin as a subcommittee, and we will take our first bill. Item number 1, AB 177, Assemblymember Bonilla. Welcome. Good afternoon.
We had just one correction on your agenda.
Oh, did I say June 29th? It's July 6th, I think, isn't it?
Well, I do have a staff
Nobody caught
here.
that, did they?
No.
I love it. No one was listening to me. That's great. Sounds like home.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, AB 177 is the sunset review of professional engineers, land surveyors, geologists, architects, and landscape architects as well. I present this bill to you, which extends the sunset date for the Board of Professional Engineers, et cetera, from January 1, 2016 to January 1, 2020. The bill also addresses other issues raised during sunset review. In March, the three boards underwent sunset review when the board's functions and operations were examined and presented at a joint committee hearing that many of us were at. As a result, we did recommend the 4-year sunset extension. Additionally, the Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists had specific issues that are addressed in this bill. The bill merges the Geology and Geophysics account with the Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors Fund. Combining these accounts will allow the board to fully integrate its operations and costs, which will improve its fiscal solvency. We're also, in this bill, giving the board the authority to discipline a licensee for failing to respond to a request for information from the board. This was a major issue raised by the board, was their lack of enforcement authority to require licensees to respond or to provide documents during the board, and this led to delays. If the board was provided information in a timely manner, complaints can be resolved much more quickly and without further action against the licensee. It also clarifies that a written contract for a licensee must contain a provision for both parties to terminate a contract. It fixes a loophole that has allowed some unscrupulous licensees to terminate a contract on their own based on their interpretation of the current statute. So that's an important clarification. And lastly, the bill gives the board the ability to develop the education standards for licensure as a geologist or a geologist in training. Currently, a bachelor's degree in geology is required for licensure. However, the necessary coursework to qualify for licensure with a geology major is unclear. This bill would authorize the board to recognize other disciplines that are also relevant to geology. Today, I have Rick Moore, the executive officer, and Nancy Eisler, the assistant executive officer from the board, to help answer any technical questions that might arise.
Very good. Thank you. Are there questions at this point? Seeing none. Witnesses in support of the bill. Yes, would you like to?
I'm Nancy Eisler, the Assistant Executive Officer of the board, and the board is in support of the bill. I would like to thank the two committees and their staff for their support of the board through the sunset process.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, members, Ralph Simone.
Thank you. You're on, Ralph.
Isn't that on? No. Mr. Chair, members, Ralph Simone representing the California Land Surveyors Association. Our association testified in support at the joint sunset hearings in March. It's the feeling of the licensed land surveyors that the board has performed its myriad of functions in a positive way, both for the profession and for service to the public. There is one provision that kind of raised some concern but has been mitigated, and that is the addition of section 8780.2 that appears on page 22 of the bill and is covered very well in your committee consultant's analysis, which is creating a separate disciplinary function for failure to respond to cooperate with the board for disciplinary action. Again, this created a lot of discussion. Ultimately, the CLSA Executive Committee said we support the bill and the extension of the board. I might also add that I believe it was on June 30th the bill was amended to provide a sunset for that specific provision, which should mitigate any concern. In fact, the State Contractors License Board has had this authority since 1984 To our knowledge, it has not been abused, and we certainly would expect that the board, the BPELSG, would use this authority in a very balanced and prudent manner. So we definitely support this bill.
Very good, thank you. Others in support?
Kelly Garman with the American Council of Engineering Companies. We work quite a bit with the board. They've always been very responsive to our members, and so we support the bill.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Steve Baker with Aaron Reed & Associates for the Professional Engineers in California Government in support.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chair and members, Terry Thomas on behalf of the California Council, the American Society of Landscape Architects, in support of the bill.
Very good, thank you, Ms. Thomas. Others in support? Seeing no one. Those in opposition? Thank you. Bring it back to the committee. We'll establish a, yes, sir. Opposition, yes. Did I forget opposition?
I'll keep it brief. My name is Dave Woolley. Oh.
Good afternoon, Mr. Woolley.
Senator Hill and the members of the committee. I wrote an opposition paper to this, and my concern is, and I submitted it to the committee, is that the term cooperate is very, very broad. And when there's a potential for a citation due to a failure to cooperate, that affects any licensee's license when you get a citation. To fight a citation, and I'm not talking about revocation or suspension, it will cost a licensee, if they hire an attorney, anywhere from about $20,000 to the highest one I've seen is $103,000 to fight a citation. When I am determined to be uncooperative, for instance, I'm a licensee, licensed land surveyor, I would prefer to have a due process right to where I could go before a court and we could talk about a subpoena process and about records that are overbroad. I submitted to Senator Hill an example of a letter from our licensing board. And what the letter says is that they want all of my records, or all of the licensee's records. This particular case that I submitted, and I'll keep it brief, says that they want all the copies of contracts, correspondence, field notes, applicable maps, so on and so forth, in duplicate. This particular file, or this particular question, came up on a resubmittal of a license or a map within 60 days, according to the Business and Professions Code. It's basically an overdue book, kind of a charge. On an overdue book, you either have the corresponding language that the Business and Professions Code allows the county surveyor, letter to the county surveyor, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're subject to a citation. It's that simple. To provide these files, in this particular file, it was a litigation file that drug on for many years. There's banker's boxes. And for a licensee to provide those, it would cost them several $1,000s. Then there's also an issue there on the Fifth Amendment. Suppose there was something in there in that surveyor or that engineer's file, the self-incrimination. Suppose they didn't have a contract or the contract didn't meet it. That has nothing to do with the overbook charge that they're asking about. I would ask that the committee consider that the board use the subpoena process, allowing due process to licensees before they're subject to hiring counsel to fight $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to fight a citation, which ultimately would give them the opportunity to a third-party neutral in a courtroom to discuss which documents they're going to give up and which they aren't. And I think that's reasonable, and I think that's fair. I did do a public records request for the Contractors Board. They've used this particular citation 134 times. I have another records request in to see actually what has happened on the ground. We'll find out. I appreciate your time very much, and I hope that you'll please read the letters that I submitted. It is a going concern. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Are there others in opposition? Seeing none, we will bring it back to the board, and before we go further, we'll establish a quorum. Please call the roll.
Hill?
Here.
Hill here. Bates? Here. Bates here. Berryhill? Berryhill here. Block? Here. Block here. Galgiani? Galgiani here. Hernandez? Hernandez here. Jackson? Here. Jackson here. Mendoza? Wachowski? Here. Wachowski here.
Very good. So any questions or comments or discussion from the committee? We have a motion from Senator Berryhill. Would you like to close?
I just ask for your aye vote, and I will be taking the committee's technical amendments.
Very good. Thank you very much. We have a motion to pass to Senate Appropriations. Please call the roll.
Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Bates? Aye. Bates, aye. Berryhill? Aye. Berryhill, I. Block. Block, I. Galgiani. Galgiani, I. Hernandez. Hernandez, I. Jackson. Jackson, I. Mendoza. Wachowski. Wachowski, I.
8, that bill has 8 votes, but we'll hold the roll open for the absent member. Thank you very much. Assemblymember
Thank you.
Bonilla. We'll move to item number 2, AB 179.
Thank you.
Healy.
Mr. Chair and members, respectfully present to you today AB 179. It extends the sunset date for the Dental Board of California to January 1st, 2020, and the sunset date for the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians, BVNPT, from January 1, 2016 to January 1, 2018, and addresses the issues raised in sunset review. The Dental Board has been operating with a structural deficit and is projected to face a deficit in the fiscal year 2017-18 or even sooner. Prior to a recent dental fee increase, the board had not raised fees for nearly 2 decades. That's 20 years. So that's a really long time not to raise fees. Also, a fee audit showed that the costs for licensure and permitting categories do not cover the cost for the license or the permit. The bill proposes to increase statutory fee caps across most licensure categories to let the board begin to recover its costs, to help solve its structural imbalance and build a healthy reserve. These fee caps are intended to last the board for multiple years, and any actual increase would need to go through the regulatory process, ensuring additional oversight and public participation. So it really is the cap that we are proposing be set as a higher level, but the increases would have to go through the normal process. It isn't an actual increase in this bill. The fees are meant to last for multiple years, as I said, and there should be public participation in any increase under that new cap. While many of you may be aware of the Department of Consumer Affairs BREEZE project and the extraordinary cost overruns associated with the project, be assured that these fee increases are not directly related to BREEZE or requested in response to BREEZE. These fee increases have been long overdue and are necessary to promote the dental board's long-term fiscal solvency. This bill would also allow healing arts practitioners to treat their spouses or partners without being considered guilty of unprofessional conduct. In addition, this bill only extends the sunset date for the BVNPT until 2018 based on concerns raised during the sunset review relating to the board's operations. This 2-year sunset date will ensure proper legislative oversight. Lastly, the bill also addresses an issue raised during sunset review for BVNPT by merging the vocational nursing and the psychiatric technician funds to increase their fiscal solvency. Today I have Karen Fisher, Executive Officer, and Sarah Wallace, Assistant Executive Officer of the Dental Board, to help answer any technical questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you. Witnesses in support. I see no questions at this point in time, but there may be some. Mr. Valencia.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. John Valencia, representing the California Dental Assisting Association, California Association of Dental Assisting Teachers, and the Foundation for Allied Dental Education. Our letter of support was timely delivered, but apparently we didn't make the wire for the analysis, so our apologies for that. We did recommend a couple of amendments, one that I'd like to speak to and one item in the analysis. The analysis correctly describes the fee increases in some cases as dramatic. And you heard, each of you chairs and members of the committee heard back in March that many of our dental education programs haven't seen a representative of the dental board in 7 years, and then some. So if the fees are to be increased, notwithstanding the internal regulatory process at the dental board, we think these committees should hear some sort of milestone report as to how they're doing in terms of actually visiting the programs that are paying the fees. Otherwise, we wind up paying fees, even at the current level, for no particular service. And you heard testimony to that effect back in March. Secondly, the recommendation we have for a positive and we think friendly amendment would be also related to testimony that you heard in March. Unfortunately, the dental board takes the position that when dental assisting issues arrive before the full board, even though they've been discussed at committee and dental assisting committee, DAC as it's called, it's been fully vetted. So if you were to show up as a member of the public and not known to be a legislator, you'd probably be told what our representatives are, and that is, we're not going to take your testimony. The matter's been fully vetted. So we have a simple suggestion, that the board be directed to provide reasonable opportunity for dental assistants regulated by the board and members of the general public to testify on dental assisting matters pending before the full board for action as part of its public proceedings prior to acting on such matters. Reasonable request, we think. But we are supportive of the bill. We do appreciate both of your investment in dental assisting matters as they've been raised by the Sunset Review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valencia. Other witnesses in support? Seeing none.
Gary Cooper, representing the oral and facial surgeons of California, in support.
Thank you, Gary. Mr. Cooper?
Good afternoon, Brianna Pittman with the California Dental Association. CDA has not actually taken a position on the bill, but we did want to come here and say we really appreciate all of the thoughtful attention to the financial sustainability of the board, and we'd like to thank the author and the BNP committee staff for all their hard work on the bill, and we are comfortable with it moving forward. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Others in support? Is there anyone here in opposition to the bill?
May I ask a question
Yes,
of the Dental Association, if I may?
CDA representative?
I'm curious why you're not taking a position, but you're comfortable with the bill. Is there something about the bill, or, I mean, it would be helpful to kind of get a sense of where the organization is that is theoretically most likely to benefit or be impacted by this. Could you share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the main issues is the increases in the fee caps. So there were two increases fairly recently that I think close to doubled the dental the licensure fee. So I think there's some sensitivity with how high the caps go among our membership, but recognizing that it is very important that there's fiscal sustainability and that these caps just allow the dental board to do what they need to do to raise the necessary revenues. We, sort of, our dentists don't necessarily like it, but they understand the necessity of it. That's really where it came down.
Thank you very much. And may I then follow up with the author? So I thought I heard you say that there hadn't been any increase in two decades.
In the cap. And maybe you can answer specifically. We did last year and the year before, we had to deal with incremental issues, and I think both committees weren't necessarily very happy at that point in time, and we're hoping now with this sunset that we're going to have a longer-term fix by putting the cap at an appropriate level, and then expecting that the board will, on a regular basis, require the adequate fees be paid.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. My name is Karen Fisher, and I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Board. Assemblywoman Bonilla is correct in that we're moving forward with just adjusting our caps upward. We did have a fee increase, which we hadn't had in nearly 16 or 18 years last year. So we raised the fees to the caps for initial licensure and renewal, okay, not the other permits. We then went forward with legislation that actually created a fee for our initial licensure and renewal fee, which is the bulk of our revenue coming in, with legislation last year. So we moved to $525. We knew that was a temporary stopgap, if you will, to get us on some sort of a financial footing before we could have our analysis done by an outside auditor to determine what the other levels would be for the permits, so that we're not fully relying on our initial licensure and renewals to pay the bulk of going forward. So I don't typically defend the California Dental Association, but they are working closely with us in the future while looking forward to working with us on raising the fees. But in order to raise the fees, we need to raise the caps, and that's why Assemblywoman Bonilla has put forth the caps that she has.
I appreciate that. I'm glad everybody's working together. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I carried the bill last year that raised the fees. It was SB 1416, and it was understood at that time that it was a stopgap measure, really, that there'd be greater fee increases needed in the future. So I'm glad to see the caps are being raised in this bill. It was done with the understanding that the work being done by the board in overseeing the practice of dentists, the vast majority of whom do very good work, but some of whom do not, is more closely monitored by the board, and that the huge time delays between reports of bad actors in the field of dentistry and the time they're allowed to continue to see patients before they're actually disciplined would be cut dramatically to protect consumers.
Thank you, Senator Block. And the question that Mr. Valencia raised, or the issue related to responsiveness and being able to make whatever comments someone would want before a decision is made. Is that going to be addressed?
Thank you for allowing me to comment on that. The board fully complies with Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, and at all times take public comment on all issues. I'm not exactly sure what Mr. Valencia was talking about in particular, but his comment overall is wrong.
Well, would you, maybe Mr. Valencia could get you that information, we would, because I want to make sure that
Absolutely.
That there are comments prior to a decision.
Absolutely.
We see that in other areas.
Yes, we fully comply with Bagley-Keene, which allow all public to make a comment at any time during our board meeting. We have it agendized, and we certainly want to maintain transparency and allow everybody to comment.
Very good. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. Other comments or questions? Senator Bates.
As a member of a local government for many years, when we got fee increases, we always had a cost analysis, and I don't know whether that has been done on this, so we understand why the fees are going up. Most of the time, it's because the cost of salaries and benefits and the personnel that's needed increases, and that would be helpful. I won't be able to support it today, but I think in the future it would be very helpful as we're having our caucus and analysts look at it, that we can have some of that information.
Thank you, Senator. We did have an outside audit done. That report is available, and we'll make sure you have a copy of that.
I appreciate that.
Other comments or questions? Is there a motion?
Move the bill.
Thank you very much. A motion by Senator Galgiani. This would be to do pass to Senate Appropriations Committee. Please call the roll. Would you like to close?
I just ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Bates?
No.
Bates, no. Berryhill? Block?
Aye.
Block, aye. Galgiani? Aye. Galgiani, aye. Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Mendoza? Wachowski?
Aye.
Wachowski, aye. 6.
Bill has 6 votes. We'll hold the roll open for the absent members. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll move now to item number 3, AB 180.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Bonilla.
Mr. Chair and members, I present to you today AB 180, which will merge the Funeral Directors and Embalmers Law and the Cemetery Law into the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau Act, and merge the separate funds into the renamed Cemetery and Funeral Fund, which will help increase fiscal solvency. The bill also requires the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau to report to the appropriate policy committees of the legislature before January 1st, 2020, and requires the Bureau to conduct a review of the Endowment Care Fund requirements by November 1st, 2018. This bill is one of 5 sunset bills. And again, it is dealing with the issues that we all heard during the sunset hearing process. The Bureau regulates nearly every aspect of the licensed cemetery and funeral industries and has the responsibility for oversight of both the fiduciary and the operational activities of the industries, including cemetery endowment care trust funds. Today I have with me Lisa Moore, the Bureau Chief, to answer any technical questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Ms. Moore. Are there witnesses in support? Very good. Thank you.
Chair and members, Jerry Desmond on behalf of the Cemetery and Mortuary Association of California. While technically we do not have a position on the bill as amended last week, I can say that we are analyzing the significant provisions that were added to merge the Cemetery and Funeral Funds and the Cemetery Act and the Funeral Act that have been on the law since 1949 to make sure that there's no errors that are in the text so that the consumer protections are preserved and the regulations that are clear to the industry. We're in the middle of that review because the bill was just in print last week and we didn't see it to that point. But we do support, of course, the continuation of the Bureau, the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau, the continuation of the consumer protections and the review that's being conducted to make sure it's an efficient and effective act.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate those comments. It's very good. Thank you. Other witnesses in support? Seeing none. Witnesses in opposition? Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to the board committee. Are there questions, comments? Seeing none.
Move the bill.
We have a motion from Senator Bates. Would you like to close?
I'll respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Very good. Thank you. This is a due pass to Senate Appropriations Committee and a motion by Senator Bates. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Bates?
Aye.
Bates, aye. Berryhill? Aye. Berryhill, aye. Block?
Aye.
Block, aye. Galgiani? Aye. Galgiani, aye. Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Mendoza? Wachowski?
Aye.
Wachowski, aye. 8.
That bill has eight votes. We'll hold the roll open for the absent members. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move to item number 4, AB 181.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. AB 181 is the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology Sunset Bill. It is a sunset extension measure for this board, and we'll make some of the legislative changes that came up during our sunset hearings. As a result of the issues that were raised, this bill will require the board to establish through regulation a, quote, personal service permit, which will allow a licensed individual to provide professional services outside of an establishment. This bill will require the board to hold at least 2 stakeholder meetings in developing these regulations, and this bill makes it clear that a, quote, personal service permit holder does not need to be employed by the establishment. In addition, this bill will require the board to report back to the legislature by July 1, 2017 on the regulatory process and the issuance of the personal service permits. This is a kind of an interesting issue. This is when you have a cosmetologist or maybe go to a wedding and perform services outside of the actual establishment, or perhaps come into an office setting and provide their services there. We know what's going on, and this is just a way for us to help make sure that it's actually now going to have a service permit that will help regulate it. It's also going to require the board, under the oversight of the Office of Professional Exam Services, to conduct a review of its current 1,600-hour curriculum requirements and the practical examination for the cosmetologist's license. We found, as we went over the whole sunset review, that there were issues in the Spanish language test portion, and felt that it was just time for a review to make sure that the hours and the test were really helping all the job applicants and students do their very possible best in this field. Also, it reviews and revises protocols for its inspector programs where language barriers exist between inspectors, licensees, and owners. And again, we were finding that sometimes there'd be an inspection, but when they arrived there, perhaps the owner didn't speak English, and we needed to make sure that we were having really clear communication around the inspections. Also requires the board to establish a health and safety advisory committee to provide recommendations. Requires the board, I already mentioned this, but yeah, to review the Spanish language examination if the pass rate does not improve in the next year. We are really concerned by a very low passage rate in the Spanish language exam. In addition, this bill makes technical changes to delete references to obsolete code sections and update references to other agencies. And have with me
Christy Underwood, the Executive Officer.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you. Are there witnesses in support?
Maria Garcia with Greenberg-Traurig on behalf of Manicube. We are testifying in support of AB 181 and specifically the provision requiring the establishment and adoption of regulations for the personal service permit. Our client, Manicube, provides 15-minute manicures in offices to women who are strapped for time. They operate in the East Coast of the United States right now, and they're anxiously awaiting the opportunity to expand their operations here in California. So we respectfully request your aye vote.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senators, Fred Jones on behalf of the Professional Beauty Federation of California. We are in support of the bill. The board did ask for some other statutory reforms that haven't been included in this measure yet. Not sure there'll be time in the legislative session to do that, but next year there will be a review of another agency that impacts our beauty colleges, and that's the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education. It's been a problematic agency for our schools, but more importantly for their mission for our students. And our students, when they get wronged by a fraudulent school, invariably turns to this board, the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. The board controls its curriculum. It inspects all their schools each year, its facilities, its equipment, and then, of course, gives the licensing exam. And that's the reason why students are at the school to begin with. And so that's the entity they reach out to. And unfortunately, because of this weird dual oversight, some of the students' complaints get lost in the shuffle, to be quite frank. So next year, when the BPPE is up for sunset, we will continue to play this one note that we think there should be one DCA agency that has oversight, and we think that's appropriately the State Board. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Others in support? Are there witnesses here in opposition? Seeing no one, the committee have a comments or questions? We have a motion from Senator Berryhill, and this would be to do pass to Appropriations Committee. Would you like to close?
I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Please call the roll.
Hill.
Aye.
Hill, aye. Bates. Berryhill. Berryhill, aye. Block. Block, aye. Galgiani.
Yes.
Galgiani, aye. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Jackson. Mendoza.
Jackson, aye. I'm sorry.
Jackson, aye.
I was being distracted by my colleague.
Mendoza.
That never happens.
Akowski.
Aye.
Akowski, aye.
Bates, aye.
Bates, aye.
8. That bill has 8 votes. We'll hold the roll open for the absent members. Thank you. We'll move now to item number 9, AB 684.
Thank you.
And I wanted to announce that the author for AB 1306, Assemblymember Burke, has pulled that bill for today. Had asked that it be heard at our meeting next week, but we don't have a scheduled meeting next week. But as a courtesy to Assemblymember Burke, we will have a hearing for her bill.